Hey everybody, how are you out there in podcast land? It is February the 11th, 2022. It is Super Bowl weekend. Party time. Rock and roll fans, sports fans, unite for this great and glorious weekend. This is episode 26 of The Fortress of Rock with me, the Maestro, Kevin Crane. Glad to have you aboard. We have got a lot to talk about this week. Some good, some bad, some controversial. I'm sure some of the things that I say will get under your skin, upset you, offend you. Deal with it. First and foremost, as always, we have to get into the news of the world. Our tribute to Freddie Mercury and Queen, where we tackle all the rock and roll headlines of the week. First and foremost, we have got a good old-fashioned rock and roll Donnybrook going on between Eddie Vedder and Pearl Jam and Nikki Sixx and Motley Crue. And this has been a fun week for me because I have bounced this off my daughter, I have bounced this off my best friends, and I'm getting kind of a split decision situation going here. So I will leave it to you out there. Send me a message. Let me know what you think. Who's on the right side here? Who's on the wrong side? Is there a right side or a wrong side in this battle? So it all starts off, Eddie Vedder does an interview for a major newspaper where he says he used to work kind of as a roadie, one of those handyman type of guys when he was younger, back in the mid to late 80s, before Pearl Jam got together and hit it big. And of course, back then, the bands were the hair metal bands, the glam rock. The word Eddie Vedder used to describe those bands is that he despised them. That word is a direct quote. He despised them. I didn't. I love them. But we'll get into a deep dive on the argument here in a few minutes. Let's get through the whole back and forth first. So Eddie Vedder goes on and he singles out Motley Crue. Of course, misogynistic lyrics. The bands cared more about how they looked and the stage setup with the pyrotechnics and the drum kits doing crazy things than they did about the music. And I will dispute that. But once the news got out, once that story got out, Nikki Sixx, the head man for Motley Crue, got on social media and he responded. And again, all this is paraphrasing. I will get as close as I possibly humanly can to giving you the exact quotes. But Nikki Sixx came back and said, basically, sorry to hear that Eddie Vedder feels that way about Motley Crue and the bands from the 80s. It's just a shame now because he's stuck in the most boring band out there. So, of course, Eddie Vedder and Pearl Jam did not take kindly to being called boring. So they came back, Eddie Vedder and Pearl Jam as a band. First off, Eddie Vedder on tour supporting his brand new solo album, Earthling, was looking back at the drum kit of Chad Smith of the Red Hot Chili Peppers, who he's got backing him up right now on his short stint of dates. And again, paraphrasing, he basically says, "Oh, look at that gleaming metallic awesome instrument that creates such great sounds and such great music. Isn't it amazing how it doesn't have to shoot out fireworks or go on a roller coaster track to be fantastic?" Again, a knock on the crew, a knock on Tommy Lee. And then Pearl Jam as a band puts out footage of a concert where the fans are going crazy, going wild, singing along with Even Flow or Alive, one of their biggest hits. And of course, the simple caption is, "Oh, gee, look at our bored fans." So, nothing better than a good old fashioned rock and roll battle. A knockdown, drag out, steel cage match between two rock and roll titans. Now, of course, the fun comes in when, as I mentioned, you start to bring other people in and you start to bring in different generations and different perspectives and different viewpoints. So, of course, people of my generation are siding with Motley Crue. People of my daughter's generation are siding with Eddie Vedder. I would love to know where you guys out there lie in terms of Vedder, Pearl Jam, are they right? Motley Crue, Nikki Sixx, are they right? I look at it this way, and this got my daughter really up in arms and upset. Yes, of course, the 80s bands were misogynistic. Nobody's going to dispute that. You can't. Motley Crue, Rat, Poison. But I would prefer to have a band that's honest and upfront. A band that says, "I'm out here to have fun, party, and have a good time. And if you don't like it, go somewhere else. Back in the 80s, you go listen to Whitney Houston, Bobby Brown, Culture Club, Duran Duran, whatever." But they were honest. As much as I love grunge, and I still say it was the last great rock and roll era, the last great rock and roll movement ever, in a way, they were phonies. In a way, they were masking all the troubles, all the emotions, all the problems they had. And as I mentioned, my daughter disputes me on this because she doesn't see my logic where I say, why didn't they get help? Why didn't they deal with their anger issues? Why didn't they deal with the problems they had? We saw Chris Cornell recently commit suicide. Alice in Chains, Lane Staley, drug overdose. Kurt Cobain, suicide. The whole grunge movement has a foundation that is based partially on suicide and flawed personalities. And I think it's because they repressed everything. They were the generation of anger. They were the generation that launched us into the 30 years that we're finishing up right now, hopefully finishing up. If this keeps going for another 10 or 15 or 20 years, God help us all. But that early 90s generation where grunge came into focus, became the be all end all for the last great run of rock and roll. And again, I appreciate it. I applaud it. Anybody who knows me knows I love all of those bands except for Nirvana. there is something wrong with the personalities involved in that generation. They're dark. They're damaged. And supposedly the music is supposed to set you free. It's supposed to fix everything. That's your release. Last time I checked, that was a Pearl Jam song, right? Release. Whereas the hair metal bands of the 80s did it outwardly, projected it outwardly in their music, in their stage shows, and their performances. Oh, the grunge people, they internalized everything because they were so deep. And Eddie Vedder looked so angry in that Jeremy video. Oh my God, he's just an angry. Eddie Vedder is a hypocrite. Eddie Vedder is a joke. Everybody wants to idolize him and believe he's the be all end all. He's the new rock god of the last 40 years. He is not. Sorry, he's not. I love him as a singer. I think he's a phenomenal singer. But he's just like any other rock persona. He puts on a show. He puts on a mask. It might not be a physical mask like Kiss or Motley Crue used to put on, but it's a mask nonetheless. And if anybody out there who listens to music doesn't believe these performers are playing you, that they're showing you a side of them that doesn't exist, that they're phonies to a certain extent, then you're just wrong and you're fooling yourself. Dave Grohl might be the only guy I believe could be as close to honest when it comes to a rock star as there is out there. And I still think there's a little bit of phoniness to him. I've said this in the past on other podcasts, on other shows here on the Fortress. Stop believing in celebrities. They're not smarter than you. They don't know more than you. Just because they were in drama club and can sing and can act doesn't make them Rhodes Scholars. Stop buying into it. Talent on stage doesn't make you the equivalent of Albert Einstein. Take their talent for what it is. Enjoy the music, enjoy the acting, but that's all it is. Speaking of pretentious rock and roll stars, Sting just sold his catalog of songs, including songs from the Police. Estimates now are ranging between $250 and $300 million. And of course, over the last couple months, we've been talking about ZZ Top, Springsteen, a bunch of others, Motley Crue, who have sold their catalogs as all these legacy acts get along in years. I can't blame them for cashing in. How can you get upset? They've got 10, 15 years left at best. Hopefully they're leaving whatever they get, the money from these catalog sales, to their heirs. Again, as we talked about with Eddie Vedder and all the phonies out there, who knows what the relationship is with their children? Do they love them? Do they hate them? Are they estranged? In a perfect world, I would hope they're using all this money that they're getting from their catalog sales to take care of the next generation, their children, their grandchildren. But again, we're dealing with egomaniacs, so who knows? And Sting, of course, is one of the biggest egomaniacs in the rock and roll world. Hopefully, he'll do the right thing. Some new tours that were announced this week. The Who are going back out on tour again. The Who hits back. Okay. I guess that's a cool name for a tour, but it seems like they're doing the same exact tour they did 3 years ago, last time I saw them, with the orchestra backing them up. I'll pass this time. I'll pass. I'll wait for the 17th Who farewell tour before I start thinking about going to see him again. Ringo Starr and his all-star band are going back out again. And then Mickey Dolenz of the Monkees is going out on a really short tour. I think 7 dates. So you can't look at it as a money grab. 7 shows is not a money grab. I think he really honestly wants to pay tribute to all of his fallen comrades. Of course, Mike Nesmith recently passed away, and then Peter Tork and Davy Jones. And again, I still think it's unbelievably sickening that the Monkees are not in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And now they're not even making the final cut when it comes to nominees. We talked about that last week. Now we have an update. Because, of course, the oh so significant, oh so important fan vote, which counts 0.1%, not 1%, 0.1% for who eventually gets into the Rock Hall of Fame. The fan vote has opened up. So over the last 4 or 5 days, I've been monitoring this. It has not changed. It has not shifted that much at all. The top 5 are as follows. Eminem, again, a joke. He's not rock and roll. Duran Duran, a pleasant surprise. I would be fine with Duran Duran getting in. Pat Benatar is 3rd. Definite, should be in this year. If not, again, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame proves to be a joke. Then Dolly Parton and the Eurythmics. Ugh. And then, of course, Judas Priest right now is just behind Lionel Richie. I can't believe I'm saying that. That sounds so awful. Judas Priest is behind Lionel Richie in voting for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Think about that. Think about that. They are 7th right now. Lionel Richie is 6th. And Dolly Parton's 4th. It's not the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Change the name. Change the name already, would you? Change it to the Music Hall of Fame. Stop acting like you're pulling one over on us. You're not. With your PC all-inclusive garbage. Just change the name of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. We do have a moment of silence here on the Fortress of Rock. I have advocated year after year, going back to what we were just talking about with the Rock Hall of Fame. I have been a staunch supporter of getting Foreigner into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and they don't get any kind of shout out, any kind of support, even though I still feel they were one of the most important, one of the most influential bands of the 70s and the early 80s in terms of record sales, opening doors for a lot of bands like Journey, like Van Halen. Ian MacDonald passed away, one of the founding members of Foreigner and King Crimson. Again, I will just say, hopefully, at some point, Foreigner starts getting some consideration and gets into the Rock Hall of Fame. I don't believe it'll happen. It's sad. Bands like Styx, bands like Kansas, those great rock bands from the mid to late 70s don't get the credit they deserve. And now Ian MacDonald, one of the founding members of Foreigner, has passed away. Couple new EPs that might be coming soon. Billy Idol, this coming from, of course, his guitarist Steve Stevens. We might get a follow-up to the Roadside EP that came out last year. Of course, the great song Bitter Taste was on that 4-song EP. Steve Stevens says they have another EP in the works. A lot harder, more rockin'. So hopefully we will get some more music coming from Billy Idol, some more new music. Of course, he recently underwent sinus surgery, so we wish him the best. And then finally, here to wrap up news of the world, Kirk Hammett of Metallica has a solo EP coming out called Portals. We've seen a lot. We've talked about a lot of solo guitar albums. Here now, Hammett jumps in after we've talked about Joe Satriani. We've talked about Joe Bonamassa. It seems like we're getting a new influx, a new rise in the rock guitar world, where these guys are going out and they're putting out albums and they're putting out a ton of new music. Tom Morello, another one we've talked about recently, with a solo album. Very interesting to see all of these rock guitar gods of the last 25, 30 years rising up now, and they are all putting out new music. Of course, coming up now, our reviews of the new music of the week. Thanks for hanging out during the break here on the Fortress of Rock. You just heard News of the World, our weekly dissection and analysis of the headlines and news items in the realm of hard rock and heavy metal. Next up is Breakdown. We're available on Spotify, Anchor, Apple, and Stitcher, with more new platforms coming soon. Thanks again and stay tuned. Hey, welcome back to the Fortress of Rock, episode 26, February the 11th, 2022. I am the Maestro, Kevin Crane. Glad to have you aboard. Super Bowl weekend. Hope you have fun on Sunday. Commercials, football, friends, food, drinking. Of course, drink responsibly. Do not get in a car, get behind the wheel if you do not feel you can drive properly. Couple notes here before we get into the two songs we have to review this week on our breakdown segment. Fortress of Rock has been on for about half a year now, exclusively on Spotify and Anchor for the first 24 episodes. We are trying to expand our reach. So, of course, last week I gave you fair warning, no pun intended, that we were going to try to mess around here a little bit and figure out what we could do to expand our audience, expand our reach. So, of course, last week I used some cheesy transition music supplied by Spotify. This week we've got a couple promos to fill the gaps between segments. The goal here is for the next month or two to build our audience and then maybe go back to just the exclusive Spotify and Anchor model that we originally wanted, because we do want to play songs. We do want to play music for you in between our segments. But again, frustratingly, it seems like nobody has the time or the energy to simply sign up for Spotify so they can listen to this podcast. You don't have to pay for Spotify Premium. Even if we put songs in the body of the podcast, you don't have to pay for Spotify Premium. You can still listen to the podcast. But somehow that seemed to be a big issue for a lot of people. So now what you're going to get is you're going to get me talking a lot about music with no music in between segments. Still the same old awesome Fortress of Rock. But as much as we would love to put music in the show, for right now, we're going to bail on that to try to get more people to listen. So that's why, again, last week you got cheesy, short, generic music intro segments. Now you're getting me talking about the show for 30 seconds in between our segments. I would so much more love to give you music, but that's up to you. You show me you want to listen to music, get onto Spotify. Again, you don't have to sign up for premium. I just don't understand why people can't sign up for Spotify and listen to their podcast without acting like it's a big hairy deal. All right, enough of my soapbox. Two songs this week. Of course, this is the calm before the storm, because starting next week, we have got a lot of new music coming out, a lot of new songs, a lot of new albums. So this breakdown segment will be short but sweet. And then once you get to the end of this podcast, where I give you a preview and wrap it up of what we're going to be reviewing over the next 3 or 4 weeks, trust me, you'll get energized just like I am about all the new music coming out soon. So this week we have two songs. Red Hot Chili Peppers have come out with Black Summer, the lead single off of Unlimited Love, which will be coming out April the 1st. Been a long time since we've heard anything from the Red Hot Chili Peppers. And I will be the first to admit I have a love-hate relationship with them. I appreciate their music. I love their music in terms of how they can cross genres. They go hip-hop, rap, funk, rock, effortlessly, it seems like. This is why they're in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, right? So Black Summer, more of a straightforward rock and roll song from the Chili Peppers. It's very catchy. I would not say it is the be-all, end-all. But again, I have mixed emotions about them. When they swing for the fences and they get it, they make contact, they do hit a home run. Sometimes when they go for it and they swing and miss miserably, they look awful. Black Summer is somewhere in the middle. I'll call it a double off the fence with the potential to be a triple. How about that for a baseball analogy? It's very catchy. It's more, again, straightforward rock and roll. For this song, they're leaving the funk and the hip hop behind. It almost feels, texture wise, almost like Under the Bridge. Little bit harder rocking, though. Again, not a heavy rocker, but a little bit harder edge than something like Under the Bridge, but thematically seems similar. I like it. I'll be interested to see what comes after. I've always thought that most bands release the second or third best song off an upcoming album first. And then usually the second song is the one. The second song is the knockout punch. So I'm going to be interested to see here, probably over the next 2 to 3 weeks, they'll release a second single off Unlimited Love. Be very interested to see and hear what that sounds like. The other song we've got for you this week is from Liam Gallagher, former lead singer of Oasis. Big reason why we are reviewing Everything's Electric is because Dave Grohl is involved. Dave Grohl co-wrote this song, plays drums on it. You can hear his influence. You can absorb his influence on this, but it's a great composite of Oasis and the Foo Fighters. The opening guitar riff sounds like something out of the early 70s. You can hear Dave Grohl in backing vocals. There's nothing here earth-shattering in terms of lyrics or music, but it's just catchy as hell. It's a great, fun song. Kind of good to see Dave Grohl get in there, maybe getting Liam Gallagher to have a little bit more fun, because we all know the history of Oasis, the brotherly battles between Noel and Liam Gallagher. Of course, over here in America, we never really got Oasis like everybody in the UK did. Of course, Oasis in the UK is almost on par with the Beatles, whereas that never happened over here in America, except for What's the Story, Morning Glory. That was their one big hit album over here. But both of these songs very similar to me in terms of they bring you in, they pull you in. They're not earth-shattering. They're not going to be in contention, for me at least, for Song of the Year. But they are fun, cool rock and roll songs that I definitely recommend that you check out. So as I mentioned, Calm Before the Storm. Lots of stuff building on the horizon. Storm clouds on the horizon. Lots of rock and roll coming over the next few weeks, next few months, the next few, hopefully, years. Now that COVID is going away, maybe some of these bands will get into the studio, get out on the road. But that being said, lots of historical moments in rock and roll to celebrate coming up next. Hope you enjoyed our breakdown segment, kids, where each and every week we will review the best in hard rock and heavy metal when it comes to new song releases, new albums, and we'll also review current tours and concerts. Next up, I Want to Go Back. We're available on Spotify, Anchor, Apple, and Stitcher, with more new platforms coming soon. Stay tuned. Welcome back to the Fortress of Rock. Hope everybody has a great Super Bowl weekend. Enjoy the game. Rams versus Bengals. Of course, if you want some in-depth analysis of the Super Bowl, check out one of our sister podcasts, Sports Frenzy 2.0. Available all over the place. Spotify, Anchor, Google, Radio Public, Pocket Cast, Breaker, Apple, Overcast, Castbox, and Stitcher. Of course, my daughter and I also do a podcast called X2Z, exclusively on Spotify and Anchor, because we do play music on that podcast. And as I mentioned, I'm kind of going through a transition period here with the Fortress of Rock, in that I really want to play music. And we did over the first 24 episodes, but now I'm just trying to get an expanded reach, get some more people involved listening. So we've dropped the music so we can get out there. Apple and Stitcher are now on board, working on some other ones who should be on board within the next couple weeks. I Want to Go Back. Tribute to the late Eddie Money. This is our segment where we look back at anniversaries of classic album releases and moments in rock history, birthdays and deaths. Two unbelievable anniversaries when it comes to my favorite band of all time, Van Halen. I want to juxtapose these two because, number one, everybody who knows anything about rock music will acknowledge the fact that Van Halen, the first album, Van Halen 1, is one of the greatest rock albums of all time. In this past week, the 44-year anniversary of the release of Van Halen, released on February the 10th of 1978. Now, I am always harsh. I am always a really down and dirty critic when it comes to things I love, whether it be music, movies, television. If it's something I really, really love, I am going to be the guy you come to because I will find the flaws. People will say, well, what does that mean? as much as I love and adore Van Halen, I never have acknowledged Van Halen as the greatest rock album of all time. I have problems with On Fire. Is it one of the greatest albums of all time? Sure. But to me, it is not the greatest. And I will pick apart any Van Halen album you put in front of me and tell you the flaws because I've listened to them hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of times. My adoration has limits. But I cannot help but acknowledge the fact that on February the 10th of this past week, one of the greatest albums of all time, Van Halen, was indeed released back in 1978. Now, here's where things get interesting because also this past week, February the 7th of 2012, the 10th year anniversary of the release of the last Van Halen album, A Different Kind of Truth. So is where you have everybody out there talking about how much they love and admire the first Van Halen album, which I do. Again, don't get me wrong. I love Van Halen 1. Absolutely adore it. But when you get comfortable with something, when you adore it, when you love it that much, you tend to nitpick. And that's what I do with Van Halen. I get upset when people do not give A Different Kind of Truth its proper respect. I got into an argument, I remember, when it first came out, going on a bus trip to a Cubs game with a guy who claimed to be the biggest Van Halen fan of all time. That's fine. You want to claim that? I'm not claiming that. I'm sure there are fanatics out there who know much more about Van Halen than I do. I'm telling you, I am in the top 0.00001%, though. I do know my Van Halen. And I was right in this argument that I got into with this guy on this bus trip to see the Cubs. When he claimed that every single song on A Different Kind of Truth was a rehash, a redo of old demos. And I said, I know a lot of them are, but not all of them. Not all of them. He insisted every single song had its basis in something in the past. So it was good to see this week when Wolfgang Van Halen came out on ultimateclassicrock.com, who we always want to give credit to, give props to, along with thisdayinmusic.com for a lot of the ideas that we put forth here on the Fortress. Of course, the opinions are mine and mine alone. But Wolfgang even came out and said, here's the ones that have their roots back in the 70s or the 80s. But he says at least 3 of the songs are new compositions, at least 3, if not more. And that's what I was trying to get across to this doofus on this bus trip, was that I understand that a lot of the stuff on A Different Kind of Truth is rooted back in the 70s when Van Halen had all these great ideas and all these great demos. But I told him, I said, it's not all based back then. It's not all based on old Van Halen stuff. Maestro wins. backed up by Wolfgang Van Halen. Thank you very much, Wolfie. Thank you. But the big thing with me is that I just think A Different Kind of Truth was fantastic. And it was a fitting swan song for Van Halen. At the time, of course, it was probably 50-50. People thinking, is this the last one we're going to hear? The last new album? Will we ever get something else? Something new? I think the one deciding factor was Wolfgang Van Halen coming into the fold. We all figured maybe that would re-energize Eddie, get him to start making new music. But of course, the health issues ended up dominating everything, and eventually he died. And as I've mentioned on this show time and time again, rock and roll will never be the same, ever, for me again. But I really think A Different Kind of Truth does not get the credit it deserves. Just like Van Halen 3. Everybody trashes that album with Gary Cherone. I'm telling you, A Different Kind of Truth, Van Halen 3 are better than most of the crap that Van Halen put out with Sammy Hagar. And I love Van Hagar. I do. But there are a lot of weak points in Van Hagar. A lot of weak points. A lot of weak moments. Borderline embarrassing moments. I appreciate the experimentation of Van Halen 3, and I love the fire, the energy, the classic Van Halen that we finally got one last taste of 10 years ago with A Different Kind of Truth. All right, moving on, we talked about Motley Crue in the first segment in the war of words with Eddie Vedder and Pearl Jam. Of course, on this day, February the 11th, 30 years ago, Motley Crue fired Vince Neil. Of course, then we got John Corabi came in. They had one phenomenal, fantastic song with John Corabi fronting Motley Crue, Hooligan's Holiday. Love Hooligan's Holiday. Occasionally, I will hear it on the radio because I do think that people realize that even though it's not Vince Neil, it kind of embodies the spirit of Motley Crue, and it is just a dead-on, fantastic rock and roll song. And of course, Vince Neil came back. Now the question is, can he make it through this upcoming stadium tour with Def Leppard and Joan Jett and Poison? Given some of the things, some of the videos, some of the stories that have come out over the last couple years. Couple of notes to make here before we wrap up segment 3 when it comes to women of music. One significant birthday, Sheryl Crow turned 60 today, born in 1962 on February the 11th. And then, of course, tragically, 10 years ago, on this day in 2012, Whitney Houston passed away. Again, it's not rock and roll to me. Neither Sheryl Crow nor Whitney Houston are rock and roll. I am exclusionary in that respect. I want my Rock and Roll Hall of Fame classes to be rock and roll only. That's why I am pushing and pushing hard for Pat Benatar to get in this year. But that being said, I am not disparaging the talent or the influence of Sheryl Crow or especially Whitney Houston. And the sad thing, of course, Whitney Houston had one of the greatest singing voices of all time, if not the greatest pure singing voice we have ever heard. It's fitting in some ways, ironic, tragic that Super Bowl weekend we have to acknowledge the passing of Whitney Houston when she put together the greatest rendition of our national anthem before a Super Bowl. And she had so many highs in her life when it came to performing, when it came to singing. That could have been the benchmark. And there are more accolades and there are more records that I won't go into here when it comes to her and the sales, the number one singles. But it's just sad. You know something in her personal life. I have not delved into that. I won't delve into that. We haven't got the salacious biopics about her life like we have some other stars in movies and rock and roll. But you know there was bad stuff happening behind the scenes. And you have to say, you have to assume, if you have half a brain, that the people around her, Bobby Brown, other members of her entourage, other people in her life, led her down a path that eventually led to her death. Far too young. Far, far too young. So again, even though it's not rock and roll, we acknowledge, we pay tribute to Whitney Houston. Well, like I said, we've got a lot of new music coming up over the next weeks and months. So stay tuned. We've got a wrap up of what's coming soon on the Fortress up next. Hope you enjoyed I Want to Go Back, our nostalgia trip each and every week, where we look back at anniversaries of classic album releases, birthdays, deaths, significant moments in rock and roll history. Now it's time, as the fabulous Thunderbirds once said, to wrap it up. Keep in mind, we're available on Spotify, Anchor, Apple, and Stitcher, hoping to get a lot more new platforms out there for you soon. Stay tuned. All right, kids, as the fabulous Thunderbirds said, it is time to wrap it up. Our preview of what's coming up here in February and beyond on the Fortress of Rock. Once again, I apologize for the last few weeks with the format shifts. Last week it was generic, short bursts of computerized music between segments. This week we put together some quick promos to bridge the gap between segments. As I mentioned previously, the last couple episodes, when we did our first 24 episodes, we were exclusively on Spotify and Anchor because we wanted to play music for you. Music that tied in to some of the topics we were talking about, some of the new music we were reviewing, and unfortunately, it was just not working out. So now we're going to try to open things up a bit, get some more audience members involved, get some more people listening. So now, starting this week, we are available on Apple and Stitcher, with hopefully a few more additional platforms opening up here over the next 2 or 3 weeks. Once we get people in, get them listening, maybe we drop back to Spotify only with the music. We'll see. Believe me, I would love to do nothing but play music for you guys, talk about a lot of these topics, review a lot of this music. But if a tree falls in the forest and no one is there to hear it, did it really fall? Isn't that the big philosophical debate, argument? So if nobody's listening, not doing me any good to yap in front of this microphone week after week, so we've got to open things up. So coming up next week on the Fortress of Rock, you will have my track by track review of the new / Miles Kennedy and the Conspirators album 4. Already kind of dove into it here on Friday a little bit as it got released today. Loving what I've heard from it so far. Of course, we've reviewed 3 songs off of it already here on the Fortress, but now you will get the full album next week. Along with that, some other new songs that I have just dug up here over the last few days. New song from Ann Wilson of Heart called Greed. We'll review that for you in the next couple weeks. Jack White, great new song. Great new song. Short but sweet. Will rock your balls off. Fear of the Dawn. We'll have a review of that coming up for you. Another song that will just rock your world. New Scorpion song. 3rd off of the upcoming album, Rock Believer. 7th Son. By far the best of what I've heard so far from that album. Full review coming soon. An unreleased track from the Duran Duran album we reviewed a few months back. A song called Laughing Boy. I'll tell you this, kids. It is better than almost anything that was on the album. And this didn't make the cut? Oh, can't figure that one out. But we'll review that for you here coming up soon. And then, of course, finally, today, along with / Miles Kennedy and the Conspirators, Eddie Vedder's solo album, Earthling, came out. So, a couple weeks from now, we will break down Earthling. And then, of course, we'll try to find a response, a review from Motley Crue. Just kidding. I don't think we would be able to read any kind of review that Nikki Sixx would put out because the profanity would be a little much. And of course, we're still trying to keep the Fortress of Rock clean. So there you go, kids. Hope you had fun. I did. As always, every Friday, new episodes will drop now exclusively, not only on Spotify and Anchor, but now Apple and Stitcher. Hopefully more to come. I will keep you updated. Check out our Facebook page for daily updates, videos. We're posting rock videos. It's a fun page. The music on it will keep you entertained. Thanks again. We love you. We'll talk to you next week. Enjoy the Super Bowl. For the record, I'm taking the Rams over the Bengals, but I'm thinking this is going to be a great game. Aaron Donald, Von Miller, get to Joe Burrow just enough to make the difference. Rams win by 7. Love rock and roll. Love you, kids. We'll talk to you next week.